I keep referring because there's so much fraud out there. No, under examination, it scares me of how many people is going to have to repay this. We finally got some guidance by the IRS on the ERC supply chain disruption for qualifying for the employee retention credit. Before I jump into the actual law and what this memo is saying, if you watched the video I did, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago on the supply chain, good news is I don't have to change anything. The bad news is I don't have to change anything. My concern here is we enter into this, there's going to be many people that have filed for the ERC that didn't qualify. They went through these offer mills and these scams. You know, Thursday I testified in the House Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee on the fraud. And this got released. Well, actually, you can see here, it got released. I'll use this little pointer here. It got released on July 21st. And in another video, I'll be covering the new updated frequently asked questions based on this memorandum in another video. But the point here is that I wanted to get this out as soon as possible. And I can tell you, I in some ways applaud that the IRS did, or I should say Chief Counsel did this. We've been asking for guidance for a long time. I wish it could have been out 2 or 3 years ago because I'm not an authority of the law. But when this memo matches what I was saying and what I was doing in videos before, I feel good about that. But now I can quote you law and examples and not what Larry believes. So let's go back and review this. And again, I think it's important. So in this video here, I'm going to explain the actual law and what it says. In the next video, I'm going to do the 5 scenarios that is in this memo, and we'll go through in detail with those 5 examples because I think they did a good job. But we have to know the law before we can look at the examples to understand why. I'll try to keep it as simple and straightforward as I can. And then in the third video, we're going to go back and update our decision tree in a simple set of steps. So whether you've already got the ERC or whether you're still contemplating the ERC, or what I'm starting to do now is do audit representation whenever the IRS comes to find you. And that will be probably down the food chain in about a week. I'll show you how the IRS can find you very easily. Don't mean to scare you, but it's part of life. So let's jump on into this. Again, this here, if you look it up, it's AM 2023-005 from the Office of Chief Counsel. So now let's go over to the analysis. Let's look at what the law is saying and understand why these 5 scenarios come out the way they do. So we want to look at the concept of the law and then apply it. Interesting note, I talk about getting frequently asked questions updated and notices. Up here at the top of the screen where it says Q&A 70 of Notice 2021-20, that tells you that the last time this was updated was in 2021. So it's been quite some time. So let's look at the analysis of. We're focused this afternoon on supply chain disruption. And I know that I took my small company, the Larry Gray Seminars, and I shopped the internet. And that was how I came to conclude about there is a lot of scams going on out there. IRS got all the indicators. I put out a video several months ago on that. But the first thing is supply chain disruption. It has to be, we know, because of a required or mandated government shutdown. Well, if we're not where the mandated shutdown was at, and we needed to get supplies, I've had questions from everything from repair shops, grocery stores, drug stores, tire shops, and when I would walk them through it, what I would say is exactly what's here. So the first thing is the Cures Act. See, I underline right there, and I'll put this pointer to it. Does not include supply chain disruption. So many people are surprised about that. Well, then where was it? It was actually question 12 of Notice 2021 provides a narrow, limited exception. Very narrow and limited. And that's where I got my foundation, because what we're going to find out, without reading all this legal jargon here, is that narrow interpretation is literally, and I'm gonna use a retail store. A retail store is not in the period of the mandated shutdown. So, for example, here in Missouri, I went out online, and when was our mandated shutdown statewide? I live in a rural area, so only state mandates do I comply with. And that started in the middle of March, about March 13th. And then on April 3rd, for 6 days, we had a stay-at-home order. But on May 4th, and I'll read to you. Now, this is the state of Missouri. I'm using it as if it was a retail store here where I live in central Missouri. Governor Parsons lifted the Missouri stay-at-home order as the state gradually starts to reopen. This ends the limitations on public social gatherings and allows all businesses to reopen. So at that point in time, I didn't qualify under gross receipts test. That's our first test on ERC. And secondly, is it had to be from a mandated government shutdown. Well, during March, April, and May, I qualified under PPP, so I couldn't qualify for ERC. So in my case of Larry Gray seminars, when I went out on the internet, I knew I didn't qualify. But the takeaway and almost always it was because of the supply chain disruption. So what this limited exception then says, and I want to go on down, it says this limited exception provides an employer may consider to have a full or partial suspension of operations due to a governmental order if under facts and circumstances the business suppliers are unable to make deliveries of critical goods and materials due to a government order that causes the supplier to suspend its operations. Supplier to suspend its operation, that's a quote. So let's just stop, because be patient with me here, because one, it wasn't in the Cures Act. Secondly, it came out of a very limited scope out of the Q&A, out of Notice 2021-20. But this limited exception says, due to a governmental order that causes the supplier to suspend its operations. That right there stops so many just there itself, because didn't qualify under gross receipts. I here where I live, I'm not under government mandate after the middle part of May. So supply chain, that's the big question. Let's go ahead and let's go to the next page. What I want to do here is look at, I'm going to call this the part 2. Circle this. So you can either read on the screen here with me or follow me. But it's a supply chain disruption by itself, so I'm right here, does not rise to the level of a full or partial suspension primarily because a governmental order applies to the employer's operation. What they're going to do here is, so let's say I've called my supplier, I'm that retail store. That supplier says, I'm not shut down. Or that supplier says, well, it's because of COVID. Well, if I don't ask them for their government order, just like I went to the state to find mine here, then I need to stop. See, each time we go through this, these are all the hurdles you have to jump over when you sign that 941X to Amended. Because remember, most of these third-party people, these scams, they're taking 15 to 30% to be your clerk. They're not signing anything. You're liable. So then what happens? If they are not shut down, I stop. That was 1. Now we're on 2. Let's say the supplier has shut down operations. Now 2, a supply chain disruption by itself does not rise to the level of full or partial suspension. Well, then what do we need here? 1, we're going to have to show that impacted my business. So I've got to document what is impact. How did it impact me? See, if it impacted me too much, then I might go out of business. But in addition, right here, the goods and material that are disrupted may not have an impact on the employer's operation that rises to a level or full or partial suspension. So, for example, I wanted a certain type of paper towels in a grocery store. Well, could I get those paper towels from another location, the same manufacturer? Could I get other brand paper towels that I could sell? Because if I didn't check with other suppliers, maybe it costs more. Doesn't matter. That's a business decision. My point is this is how you document how the supply chain disruption qualifies you as that small business. So then, we're not done. As I did in the original video, there was 3 parts to this. Or an employer may have been able to obtain the goods or materials from an alternative supplier. So you have to show the impact on that small business. And kind of in summary, I think this is kind of just really a good summary, is 1, it's not in CARES Act. 2, it was a limited scope in the Q&As. 3 is the fact then we got into that it had to suspend the supplier's operations. And then finally, the supply chain disruption by itself does not rise to the level of full or partial shutdown. We have to show that it caused an impact on us of full or partial, as if we stepped in the shoes of the supplier. So if you got a wide variety of retail items, one supplier may not shut you down. But if you're exclusive, let's say I'm in the tire business. Well, I couldn't get enough of ABC tires. I couldn't get enough? No, the supplier had to be shut down. Then did I look for alternative suppliers? Doesn't matter if I paid more. Then I have to look and say, did it impact me because I stepped in the supplier's shoe, that it raised me to the level or full or partial shutdown, as long as I also look for other goods. So I think the important thing here in all of this is that the key is we have to go through every one of those steps. And if you filed for the ERC and you used this rule or this reason, the scrutiny on this under audit is not going to be good. I've talked to many people about supply chain and what they don't realize, even in prior videos, you're stepping in the shoes of the supplier. What that means is that impact of that one supplier has to raise to the level more than nominal, and that means normally over 10% of something. But did that one supplier impact you that much because of their shutdown of their operations? I couldn't find it elsewhere. But remember, if that supplier continuing operations based on what this says, under audit, you may not win. Let's go on down to the next paragraph here. And it says here, guidance provided. See, we're back to that question 12 again. Allows an employer to step in the shoes, of its suppliers for the purpose of the suspension test. So in this case, the supplier must have been subject to the government order. I've already said that in this video. But what does that mean? See, what we're going to find out in these examples is that, well, were you in a government shutdown? Yes. You got to ask them the question. I need the documentation for it. See, I need the documentation, supplier, that you're in a government shutdown. And it's the fact that it suspended your operations. At that point in time, then I've stepped in their shoes, but then, and again here, I like this, or you may not like it. Again, the second time, suspend its operations. See, I think that's such a roadblock that you can't go on. I've talked to a lot of people about this issue, and I can't get any clearer than that supplier had to suspend operations, and when you step in its shoes, it's to the point it either partially or fully shut you down. A hard one to get to. Then I read on down and I notice a lot of jargon. It says, here's another. In addition to having a government order, the employer must substantiate its eligibility for the credit by providing records or documentations demonstrating, 1, the government order caused the supplier to suspend its operations. There's a suspend operations again. 2, the inability to obtain the supplier goods or materials caused a full or partial shutdown of you, the small business. And 3, the employer was not able to obtain these critical goods or material from alternative suppliers. We have to go through every one of those hoops to use this as a reason. And remember on our other videos is that if we take the credit, the ERC credit for a mandated government shutdown, it's only from the day it started to the day it stopped. And the thing about it is that you have to prove, you have to prove directly that supplier. And I'll tell you, to have a bar of this level, it's almost impossible. That's kind of the summary of the law. Small business that you're thinking about doing it, go through these steps and make sure you have documentation. If you've already done the credit and you don't have documentation, if you don't know that you even did the supply chain, you better go back and get documentation because we're getting ready to go to the audit phase of the IRS.